Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested, and I'm here at GDC 2016. It's a game developers conference, and unsurprisingly, the big theme this year is virtual reality. We're going to be playing a ton of VR games and demos, and one of the first ones I'm going to be playing is from a company called Survios, and they have a game called Raw Data. It's a shooting game, FPS game, using the HTC Vive. I'm excited. Let's go check it out. All right, so I'm here with James Iliff, who's the co-founder of Survios. You guys have been experimenting with VR and body presence for a long time. Give us a little bit of your history of Survios and what you're trying to do with raw data and what raw data is.
Yeah, so we've been doing VR since way back in late 2011, early 2012. Me and our other co-founders met at the Mixed Reality Lab in Los Angeles. So we actually worked with Palmer Luckey way back in the day on his early headset prototypes. Crazy devices that he came up with long before the Rift even existed. So we've been experimenting with crazy VR stuff with full body presence, full motion controls, being able to move around in a giant motion capture stage. And a lot of that early groundwork is what allowed us to start branching out and creating entertaining experiences and different types of game content.
So Raw Data, this game, which you guys are still working on, it's a first-person shooter, it's a wave-based shooter, robots are attacking you, right. But two things stand out to me in this game. One, it's a multiplayer game, cooperative, so another player is playing also on an HTC Vive, and I get to see them, but also I get to see a lot of my own body presence. So talk about the philosophy of why you want to present the player's own body and not just show the hands.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So this is certainly, in this showcase, this is just the beginning, so we consider this very much like an early introductory level to the experience. And part of that is kind of just getting the user comfortable in VR. So learning how to pick up objects, learning how to kill enemies in a very simple wave-based format, being able to interact with their own body and being able to interact with other players and other users in a compelling way, before adding on all the extra layers like movement and teleporting and full-on tower defense and all these other game modes. So as part of that, body presence is a really big deal for us. We consider it to be one of the most immersive factors in VR, but there's several ways it could shake out. We have, essentially for us, it's come down to a user preference, whether or not you want to be able to look down and see your entire body, or whether or not you want to see just a representation of your hands or the forearm in the hands. We call them hero hands, is kind of the term we've come up for it, because it's literally the best representation of the hero in VR for you. So you could have just your hero hands, or you could have your entire hero character. No matter what, in all of our content, we want you to see the other player's body, and on camera, on spectating mode, you'll see both players' bodies.
Inverse kinematics plays a big part in that. You're tracking 3 points, the headset, 2 controllers, at least for right now, and so you have to model the whole body, even the foot movements. Even if you're not doing lots of movement, you still have to model that so that a spectator or the other player can see you. Now, because you can see yourself, are those the same IK models, or have you experimented using different ones? Because your own body perception may be different than how people see you.
Right, so they don't necessarily have to be the same IK models. We're working with a lot of different algorithms, and this is just a very early work in progress. So, of course, you have to do things like foot pinning, you have to do things like animation blending when you're interacting. You want to try to match the elbows up as much as you can and predict as much as you can. It's not ever going to be 100% perfect, but it can get close enough, and we believe that right about now, with the state of IK, about half users find it to be not matching up perfectly with their body, and they get a loss of presence, and another half of users find it to be just enough for it to be more immersive, and they actually have a more engaging experience. So for us, what that tells us is, as designers, there is no perfect solution, which usually means it's a user preference.
You can also guide what the user sees and does with their weapons, what they're interacting with. For example, you have a whole slew of weapons, from a katana to a pistol to a shotgun to even a bow and arrow, which I really love using. Now, because you have a good idea of what people are going to be doing when they're holding those weapons, can you also then change IK models between weapons?
Well, yeah. I mean, depending on the type of tool that you're using, you can absolutely customize the animation and the inverse kinematics around that tool. So, for instance, using a bow and arrow is very, very different than just using a sword. So you might have different requirements to make it look as if your arm doesn't go through certain things, or that you're pulling it back in a certain way. And that's where you start to blend canned animation in with inverse kinematics in order to get a very smooth, realistic experience for anyone else who's observing you.
You really do feel like a hero playing this game, and a lot of that comes with the weapons that you have, and even with the bow and arrow, I didn't need to look down I would hit my headset actually if I tried to pull it close, but I can fire from the hip,
Right.
and it would still be accurate. So how much are you giving the player, and how much do you want them to feel rewarded from looking down a sight and being accurate versus just the satisfaction of getting a hit?
Well, we want to enable players to play exactly how they want to do it. So it's really about playing in the type of way that makes you feel like a hero. So if that means you're gunslinging and you're shooting from the hip and you feel like a badass in that way, then go for it. We'll make the game work for you. If you want to be, a Deadeye and you're looking down the iron sights and then boom, get a headshot, boom, get a headshot, that can be satisfying as well. So there's different ways that the game, in terms of the score and the leaderboard and all like the back-end metrics that calculate different types of things. And we're also looking into doing things like style points, depending on how stylish your kills are or how stylish your interactions are with gun flips and all these different types of things. But ultimately, it's up to the player to determine how they want to actually use the weapon that they've been given. And we don't do any kind of aiming correction or aim assist or anything. It's all 100% natural.
Just that good with the bow and arrow.
Yep. If you're good at bow and arrow, that means you're just a badass with a bow and arrow.
One of the things I noticed that you also take advantage of expectations on how people, where the guns are. Like the gun is at your side,
Right.
The ammo clip is at your hip, and you're modeling the hip, even though that's a really difficult thing to do
Right.
without those tracking points. And you have the katana, which you pull from your back. Even that very motion of just pulling a katana from your back is in itself satisfying. It's almost a freebie because you're playing off of the player's expectation.
Exactly.
But then you're also doing things like, if you drop a weapon, you don't need to pick it back up. It'll disappear.
Right.
So how do you tread that line between meeting their expectations and satisfying a player, but also doing things for them within your game world and making it easy to play?
Well, just tons and tons of play testing. I mean, you can go from anywhere from being completely realistic and everything acts exactly how it would in the real world to being 100% arcadey, where, weapons are all selected just from a menu and everything's kind of teleporting everywhere and there's like all time like little points popping up every time you kill something. We decided to kind of hit a middle way that actually makes it satisfying for the hardcore user that wants the realistic experience, but also has enough feedback for users who just want to get shit done and not actually have to deal with crazy complicated systems. So in that regard, being able to pull anything off your body exactly where you'd expect it, grab a grenade, grab handguns, grab an arrow, grab a sword, that kind of stuff feels really natural and intuitive. But at the same time, if you chuck it or lose it, we'll just put it right back on your back for you.
It makes it very satisfying to throw the sword then, and that becomes, like, you would never do that in real life because you'd lose your sword, but you can actually do that and make that a hero move in the game. I also noticed you're not doing any clipping. If I move my hand or a weapon into the other player, into an obstacle, it stays there, and does that take away from the realism when your hand takes away, or does having clipping actually take away from the immersion?
Well, again, this is another interesting conundrum, just like avatar embodiment. It's the question of, where do you adhere to what the physical universe says should happen, and where do you adhere to what the virtual universe says should happen? And they oftentimes can be very different things. So we start developing systems that contextualize this stuff. So for instance, working on a lot of systems that we label contextual physics feedback. And that's something that allows you to, depending on different variables or the context, such as your velocity or what we believe the player is intending to do, we will have things collide with virtual objects or not collide with virtual objects. So for instance, if you clash your swords together and we detect through prediction that you're starting to stop that motion and deaccelerate, that's telling us that the player is mimicking that motion, which means that the game should follow suit and mimic with them so that those two swords will actually collide together. If they continue to follow through, the two blades will appear as if the wrists turn and they just slide past each other. Both are compelling and natural seeming outcomes from the same exact interaction. So just like you said, pushing up against something or hitting another player, depending on context, it'll actually change.
That makes these considerations make building systems that much more complex. You're not just building physics systems where things have to fall in gravity and you have Newtonian physics. You actually have contextual-based considerations.
Right.
Now, how about the social aspect? Because it is a multiplayer game, and what are you allowing players to do to communicate with the other player? Because they won't necessarily be in the same room or even next to each other.
So voice chat's the biggest thing. Being able to talk through a mic, hear the other person's voice, and not just hear it, but actually hear it as if it's coming from the location that they're in with positional audio. So this is a big first step in terms of communicating in VR, and there's a lot of social apps doing this. We're not the only guys who are doing this. But that's a hugely compelling thing for people to actually socialize. And on top of that, being able to do all kinds of body interactions. So now that you're tracking the whole body and we're simulating what the body looks like, there's body language. So I'm actually using body language right now, like making motions with my hands. That translates into VR, and now all of a sudden you're having a conversation with a real person instead of just typing on a digital interface or having all these abstraction layers in between you and another person. So for us, we actually see it as a way that's a much more humanizing way of interacting. It's not isolating at all in VR. It's actually much more social and much more engaging and natural than any other kind of social platform that's existed up till now.
And that's what VR really brings, removing layers of abstraction from the action to the communication. That's very exciting. What's the scope of raw data going to be, and where are you guys at?
So this is very, very early stages. What you're experiencing here is what we call our showcase build. This just shows a snippet of the first level. And the first level is just designed to share the combat experience, let you play with a little bit of the toys, like the weapons in the game, and get to know a few of the enemy types a little bit, but it's by no means the entire scope. So what we're building out is actually a much larger vision for the product. It revolves around a lot of tower defense mechanics, so being able to move about larger environments into different places, protecting a nexus, defending it with different defenses like turrets and traps, barricades, all these different things. There's even different ways for enemies to attack you and a lot more different enemy types that actually compound over time and keeps it very dynamic. So every time you play a level, it never quite feels the same. So being able to build out a large set of levels for people to play is a really key aspect for raw data. So every time you hop in with your friends, you could be shooting back-to-back at enemies, deploying all your different defenses, and actually upgrading your characters and with abilities and unlocks and all these different types.
Potentially more than just two-player multiplayer?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, this is just two-player co-op, just the first way to start out the experience because it's the simplest. But being able to build it out so you can have more players playing together and PvP and PvE scenarios is certainly within the scope of our vision.
Look forward to bringing those bow and arrow skills into the game. Thanks a lot, James.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, so that was raw data, or at least one of the early missions in raw data, which got across some of the things that Survios wants to put in their game, namely multiplayer, a social aspect. I was playing with a co-op with another player in a booth next to me, also wearing the HTC Vive, and that then brings up the second point, which is the idea of body presence. We've seen a bunch of games like Hover Junkers that model your body in the game, but you never see that model. All you see are your hands. And they do that for a lot of reasons. Those developers do it for a lot of reasons, for comfort, for the sense of presence. But here, there's the option to actually see your entire body. Now, what that means is that it's going to be tricky for the inverse kinematics engine to accurately model your body because it's only tracking 3 points. And it was interesting to hear James talk about how IK doesn't have to be one static model. They can have a bunch of different algorithms, different IK models, whether you're looking at your own body, whether you're looking at someone else's model, whether you're using one weapon or not, and using those different expectations, different cues. If you're holding a pistol, holding a bow and arrow, holding a katana, all of those different weapons will allow them to adjust the IK model to best represent the hand movement, so you can actually track and model things and abstract things like the elbow and like your shoulder and the clavicle. In the experience, it felt natural. I mean, I saw my arm, and I looked. First thing I did was want to look down at my body. I actually didn't get to see my body model in this demo, but the elbow worked the vast majority of the time. Now, another interesting thing that they did was they had virtual occlusion, where if I would move my hand or hold the gun and move it past like a table, and the table's not there in real life, so the controller obviously moves past it. Because I was moving at a slow speed, and actually the virtual model got stuck there for half a second or a millisecond and then caught up with me. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out, if that's going to take me out of the feeling of presence. They did talk about interesting things like using cues like the physics, the speed of movement. If I'm holding a sword and I slash it against another sword, they'll know whether I want to naturally hold back and mimic the like two lightsabers clashing together and then give me a visual cue for that, or if I'm moving fast enough for them then to execute an animation to have the swords slide off each other. These are interesting considerations. It's not easy for a developer to integrate body presence, and also to have realistic physics and to build in systems that have guns and physical objects, katanas, bows and arrows. The game itself, a lot of fun. It was still like a wave-based type shooter. You get waves of robots. You have swarms of robots from above, drones. You had invisible enemies, and I think they're doing a good job mixing up the type of enemies that they're going to require different types of weapons and different type of engagements. Things I did, for example, use the pistol, shoot enemies from afar, but then also when they got close, then pull out the katana and then hack and slash them. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I hope to see a lot more of it in the future, but really what they're doing is just an example of all the considerations that developers have to make as they're making VR games. Everyone is still learning, and that's why it's really exciting at events like GDC. And we'll have a lot more from GDC on the site, on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you next time.